Hey everybody, and welcome back to The Evolution of Zelda. In this series, we're taking a look at how the mainline console Zelda franchise progressed over time. Today we'll be taking a look at the black sheep of the series, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. While I will be reviewing the game on its own merits, I will be making references here and there to part 1 of this series, The Legend of Zelda, so be sure to check out that video if you haven't already. I'll leave a link to it in the description. With that said, let's jump into Link's adventure. Following the smashing success of The Legend of Zelda, only 11 months later Nintendo released its successor in The Adventure of Link. That's an incredibly short development period, which might suggest Nintendo would use similar assets and only make minor tweaks to the formula as the series moved forward. Nope, this game is nothing like the first. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but they're quite different in a lot of ways. Most notably, this game is a 2D side-scroller, whereas the original was a top-down dungeon crawler. There's a boatload of other differences, and let's kick those off with the graphics and art design. If I complained about the generic nature of the look of The Legend of Zelda, this game is on a different level altogether. Not only does it look generic when comparing it to the previous entry in the series, but it looks so damn similar to the plethora of 2D side-scrollers in the NES library. I think my primary complaint stems from the color palette. For the majority of the game, it looks really washed out. However, I will admit that this game does have a greater variety in terms of environments. There's clever use of different coloring to let the player know what type of terrain they're crossing in the overworld, and the battle scenes within set themselves apart from one another. But then you've got towns that only differ in terms of building structure and color scheme, and dungeons that mostly only differ by color as well. So while the variety is marginally superior, the world itself lacks a vibrant quality that would give it more life. Then there's the character models. Let's start with Link. Pale green garb, I know, I'm harping on the crappy tones, but you know what tone is really fucked up? Would you take a look at the color of Link's sword for a moment, please? If I was a betting man, I'd say Nintendo was aiming for a nice brown color to represent a wooden sword. But look at me in the face and tell me this thing doesn't look flesh colored. Yeah, it looks like Link is handling his rod and smacking the monsters of Hyrule to death with it.
Is this how your mother likes it? I bet your mother likes it like this.
There's enemy design, which admittedly isn't so bad. Some of the enemies are inspired or directly even copied from the first game, but overall the advancements in modeling are pretty great. But the problem I have is the color scaling. By this I mean the game uses different colors to indicate the difficulty of a type of enemy. That way they could reuse enemy designs and just change the tone, and then bam, it's a new monster. Thing is, the colors go from orange to red for starters with the difficulty. Fair enough, the darker they get, the harder they are. That's very intuitive. Oh wait, fuck, now there's a blue one. Well, okay, I guess that means he's harder than the red one, but they did throw the shade progression out the window. What the fuck? Now there's a blood red one. So let's see here. We got orange, red, blue, and fucking red. Got it. Makes total sense. Or you could have just put a pale yellow in since you seem to like mundane, unsaturated bullshit. I'll shut up now. About the graphics at least. Though in contrast to the art design, I actually do think the sound design is a nice step forward for the series, especially considering the short gap in release time. As far as the sound effects go, the game borrows a lot from the previous game, but in a good way. The noises bring a familiarity to the ear that makes you feel like you're in a Zelda game despite the large shift in mechanics. And when it comes to music, this time there is thankfully many more tunes included. Not only that, but the melodies are more complex, which takes away from the complaint I had about the tone being harsh on the ear, but not completely. Perhaps this is something that might vary for you, but personally I would still get headaches after listening to the game for more than a few hours. Something about that 8-bit sound just drills into your skull after a while. Though last time I didn't mention that it's fair to assume Nintendo didn't intend for you to complete the game in a single sitting, so for many this could be a moot point. That said, they still include the long screech noise when you use a fairy or spell to heal up, though that sound level is toned down. What they really fucked up on is not getting rid of the god-awful beeping when you're low on life. I'm gonna say sorry in advance because I want to keep bitching about this until it's a non-issue, which let me give you a hint, it's a problem across the whole damn franchise. I said it before, but to reiterate, I'm perfectly okay with a beeping sound alerting you when you're low on life. Maybe you get tunnel vision when you play and you need the alert, that's fine, but what you don't need is for it to go non-fucking stop until you get healed. Once you've heard the beeping, you know you're low on health, so after a few beeps, it should just stop. You might not be aware enough to notice you're near death, but I'm positive you're aware when you need healing because of the freaking beeping. But this is gonna be a problem across the entire series, and I've already voiced my complaint here and said what I think is the solution, so I'm gonna stop bitching about it in future reviews and hope that it's not a problem in Breath of the Wild, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. As with the game's amazing color saturation, I'll stop beating that dead horse for now and move on to the meat of today's video, the gameplay. If you liked how the original Zelda drops you right in on the action from the get-go, you'll be right at home here. You start in the Northern Palace, which you can think of as your home base as you go off into the wild. The first thing to address is obviously the change in genre. Whereas the last game was a top-down dungeon crawler, this is a side-scrolling 2D platformer with action and RPG elements. This mechanic turned a lot of people off to this game. When I went back in college to play the more retro Zelda titles, everyone I asked told me not to touch this pile of shit with a 10-foot pole. This isn't real Zelda, they said. This game is hard as hell to the point of being bullshit, they said. Let's take a look at these complaints one at a time. For starters, I would argue that if you compare the NES duo of titles to the more modern titles like Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess, this game is actually more faithful to its successors than the original. The top-down formula of the first game is only reused in A Link to the Past, where all the others have some focus on platforming, include Magickas in Zelda 2, and also have side quests to obtain key items like heart pieces in lieu of burning a random-ass bush or something. That's not to say the rest of the franchise didn't borrow plenty from the OG Zelda, but there's a good bit here that's key to the growth of the rest of the series. However, I do have to admit that while the change in mechanical design is a nice change of pace, it does feel too similar to many other platforming titles of the time, though at least it does add its own unique flavor with the RPG elements. Now let's talk about the second point made prior and how I totally agree with it. While I think this game offers valuable pieces of advancement to the franchise, I have two major complaints of Zelda 2's gameplay. It's punishingly difficult, and it is so damn grindy. Oh, that's Rich, the YouTuber that loves the Souls series, is whining about difficulty. Yes, but you've heard me say it a million times at this point. The thing I like about the challenge in the Souls games is that in most cases the difficulty is fair, alleviating any frustration because you know if you die, it's your fault. In all fairness, that's true of this game as well. The issue is that there's so many areas where the margin of error on your part is so microscopically small, you have to be some kind of gaming savant to come out on top. Hyperbole aside, let's give some examples of what exactly I find overly difficult about Zelda 2. Number 1, you get knocked back when you get hit. Fuck that, and no, I don't mean literally, you rock hard motherfucker. The reason this is so annoying is that you'll often get bonked into a hole for an instant death. Number 2, deaths are generous to a point. So if you die in a dungeon, the game is kind enough to spawn you back in the same room until you run out of lives, that is. Once you run out of lives, you get tossed back into the home base that we talked about earlier. I can't even begin to convey how annoying this is. In the beginning, it's pretty harmless because the first few temples are pretty close. But later on, you gotta go through Death Mountain, a maze where difficulty happens to spike up to DEFCON get wrecked, bitch! So anytime you get a game over, you gotta go all the way back through the entire overworld to get back to where you were in the temple. But guess what? With the game being so hard, you're liable to lose at least a life or two along the way. And you know how many 1-ups I found over the course of my 16-hour playthrough? Fucking 1. Number 3, they kept the ability to toss the sword at full HP, but it does jack shit to most enemies. Number 4, the enemies are so erratic in their pattern that you have to rely on luck as much as skill. Exhibit A, this guy throws about a bajillion cherry bombs a minute in a hectic manner, and if you get hit by one, you get knocked back and gotta go through them all over again. Exhibit B, Dark Nuts, these guys have always been tough, but I can't wrap my head around defeating them effectively. It really seems like a spray and pray method of attacking, which is bad enough, but then you get random dick sword. Tell me how you're standing up straight blocking my attacks and yet you're thrusting me with a sword from below the belt. Exhibit C, dragon heads or whatever you call them. Ever played a Castlevania with those freaking nightmarish Medusa heads? Then you know what to expect here. Endless fucking frustration. Number 5, some enemies don't give XP because reasons. Damn, Dmod, you're smooth because now we can have a segue into the grind portion. That's right, this game actually has a level up system. You have attack power, health, and magic, and each level up randomly all the way from level 1 to a max level of 8. But damn, is it an absolute grind to get to max level. And as I've so eloquently illustrated, this game is hard as balls, so you're gonna need every advantage you can get. So enjoy using the random encounters in the overworld to farm for XP in the hope you can stand a chance. Speaking of randomness, this game's just as cryptic as the first Zelda. Let's give some examples. Dagu's Cabin, an area you're required to find to progress in the game. How do you find it? Oh, just happen to press A on this single tile across the massive overworld. I mean, how is this even defensible? How would you know to find this? Another example, Mirror Girl. She wants you to find her mirror. Simple enough, or so you think. Her mirror just happens to be in a nearby house under a table. How do you get it? You click A next to the table. I feel like a broken record, but how are you supposed to know to do that? Does the game just expect you to run around the game clicking A and hoping for something awesome to happen? And this seems like as good of a time as any to discuss the NPCs. I do like the addition for the most part anyway. Shock and awe, I know, I like a design decision, but relax, I'm mostly done voicing my frustrations now. The reason I like the addition of NPCs to give hints and fill the world space is because it makes the game feel more alive. Though many citizens are just filler and just say some random BS, it still adds character to the world. The best part of each town is that you can find an old man to give you a new ability, something I actually quite like. This game has a magic system and honestly, it's fantastic. Let's go through the spell roster. Number 1, Shield, cuts all damage in half. This can be incredibly clutch if you're about to go through a hard room or face a tough boss. Number 2, Jump, allows you to jump extra high. Mostly a spell that halts progression, requiring you to obtain it, but it does have some special uses like against one of the final bosses. Number 3, Life, restores your life. This spell is damn essential in this game, but its cost is very mighty. Number 4, Fairy, turns you into a fucking fairy. I'm not joking. Boom, you're a fairy. This can allow you to YOLO your way through an entire screen of enemies or otherwise get to unreachable locations. Number 5, fire. Throw fireballs out of your sword like you got a fire flower. Pretty awesome and required to kill some of the enemies in the late game. Number 6, reflect. Reflect spells with your shield. Number 7, the spell, a lame ass name magic that lets you progress in the game in this one cryptic spot, but it can be used to turn enemies into weaker enemies. Number 8, lightning, a spell that wrecks house and it's required for one of the final bosses to be vulnerable to sword damage. One thing to note is that all the spells with lasting effects are only active for one screen. This can be frustrating because it's so easy to run out of magic and it's a crapshoot deep in dungeons if you'll get more. Worst part is that sometimes jumper fairy might be required to progress late in a dungeon, and if you have no magic, you're just shit out of luck. But on the whole, I do like the addition of the magic system. You can also learn the upward and downward thrusting, and for everyone's sake, I'll stop making dick jokes. And finally, of course, you've got a princess to save. To do so, you gotta hit up 7 dungeons and defeat the bosses within, which is standard fare for Zelda, but it's still quite enjoyable. I could give plenty more examples of how the dungeons play out, but honestly, I'm exhausted from expressing all my rage toward the gameplay. Let's move on to the story. So do you remember that hint I gave you in the last video? Interestingly, the Triforce of Courage is absent in this game, but I'm sure that's something that'll be addressed in the sequel. Hint, hint. Well, with us collecting the Triforce of Wisdom and Power in the previous game, we're now on the hunt for the Triforce of Courage. This starts when Link's hand starts glowing on his 16th birthday. What a present. To give some backstory here, long before the events of the first game, the King of Hyrule was looking for a worthy successor to receive the crowning jewel of the royal family, the Triforce. With its immense power, he knew he could only entrust it to someone pure of heart, but even his own son didn't fit the bill. So he decided to hide the Triforce of Courage and wait for it to call out to someone courageous. When the king died, his son seized the throne of Hyrule and demanded the Triforce for his own. While he was able to obtain the Triforce of Power and Wisdom, the location of the Courage piece was unknown to everyone other than his sister Zelda. Which, to prevent confusion, let me reiterate that this backstory takes place before the first game and that this is a separate Zelda. The prince stormed the castle with his court wizard and demanded this Zelda tell him the Triforce of Courage's location. When she refused, the wizard cast a spell on her, putting her to sleep, taking so much magical energy that it killed the wizard himself. You know, I don't really get that whole point. You cast a sleeping spell on the person with the only knowledge of what you want, and it was so draining it killed you, which means you can never even get what you want. Yeah. Anyway, the prince abandoned the throne out of guilt, and the Triforces of Wisdom and Power were passed down the royal family to the Zelda of the original game, and you know where things go from there. Well, with Link showing signs of being worthy to be granted the Triforce of Courage on his 16th birthday, Impa tells him he must travel the world to its dungeons and fill up crystals that serve as keys to the Great Palace. Within the Great Palace, Link faces his shadow in a final test of his mettle, and he's granted the Triforce of Courage. With all 3 pieces united, he returns to awaken the slumbering Zelda, the curtains drop, and Link finally gets a chance to sheath his sword. Oh yeah, and there's also this whole idea that the monsters are left behind from Ganon's coup in the previous game, and if they can obtain Link's blood and sprinkle it on Ganon's ashes, he'll be able to be resurrected? Pretty disturbing logic and terrifying to know that every enemy in the game wants to harvest your blood. But all in all, it's a pretty neat story, and it wraps up the current known events in this portion of the timeline. Discussing that is beyond the scope of this video, but maybe we'll get there someday. With all the cards laid out on the table, how do I feel about the game as a whole? Well, its graphics aren't exactly pleasing to the eye, the sound design is an improvement, but not really a leap forward I can praise too heartily. The gameplay is honestly a mixed bag. While the game feels rewarding to play and beat, has some pretty cool bosses, and took big risks to deviate from the previous entry's formula, the overwhelming difficulty and grind is enough to make me recommend not playing this game. The biggest crime to me here is the backtracking required after a game over. It's criminal to force the player to put in at least an hour of gameplay in the late game to get back to a dungeon that's so hard you'll likely get more than a few game overs. But if you do like challenge, this has gotta be the hardest Zelda without a doubt, and the gameplay is mechanically solid. Finally, the story is cool, but rather than its own separate entity, it kind of feels like an epilogue that ties up the previous game's loose ends and gives additional exposition to Hyrule's era of decline. So in the end, I suppose my recommendation is based on how you feel about the things I discussed over the course of this review. If the qualities that bog down the experience for me sound like something up your alley, then by all means pick the game up and take it for a spin. But for most of you, I think you'll find a better Zelda experience elsewhere. And when we're talking about amazing Zelda experiences, boy oh boy, I can't wait to talk about A Link to the Past with you all next time. It's been a pleasure crying about how bad I am at this game and the salt it generated within my soul. If you've ever played this game, be sure to let me know how high your sodium levels were upon completion. For all the latest video updates, be sure to follow me on Twitter. If you want to see me play games live, be sure to follow me on Twitch. I want to thank you all for your continued support of the evolution of Zelda, and as always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.